Hello and welcome to Jolineknitsalot. This is my show about knitting and crafting and the things I get up to here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We are in the middle of our first spring here. If you live someplace cool or in a wintry sort of climate, you might get this too, where you get your first warm up of the year. Snow starts to melt, the birds start singing, and everybody gets happy and excited. But we have to keep in mind that it's going to cool off and get warm again, and then cool off and then get warm again. It takes a little while for us to get really into spring here where I live. So it's the beginning of March and we're having our first spring. We've definitely had a lot of snow melting and things are looking up, but we're trying to be realistic. The last couple of weeks in the news have been quite up and down, and so I find myself reaching for calming things like my knitting, or books, or relaxing podcasts to watch. And so if that's brought you here, I hope that that's what you find. I know that politics, the economy can be very, very stressful. So let's talk about some things that are less stressful. The first pair of socks I have off the needles are my Mande socks. This is a pair of socks that's part of my 3-month sock club that has been put together by a good friend of mine for me especially. She has sent me patterns and yarn to complete these socks, and this is the second set of socks in this 3-month subscription sock club that is meant just for me. So this is the Mande sock pattern, a pattern by Renee Knits or Andrea Mowry, and the sock yarn I got is some Sunday Fiber Co. Sunday Fiber Co. is a Canadian dyer out of Vancouver. And this is some of her Valentine's Day socks. So I think that this light pink is called Hard Eyes, and the darker pink I think is XOXO. So let me just show you this pattern up a little bit closer. I'm using some sock blockers that were made for me by a friend of a friend. They're wooden and they're very solid, but they're great for showing off socks and blocking socks. This pattern is a toe-up sock. It's a lot like the DRK Everyday socks if you've knit those. So it starts at the toe, it works up. In this case, there's a lacy pattern that goes up the front of the foot, and then a slightly different lacy pattern that carries up the back of the foot, and then ribbing on the bottom with a fleegle heel. I did enjoy knitting these quite a bit. The yarn is lovely. It's an 80% organic merino and 20% recycled nylon. So they're kind of an eco-friendly sock yarn, and it's really soft and plump yarn, so it was great to knit with. And I really enjoyed using the yarn, and I have probably about a half a ball left, so I can knit another pair of socks with that yarn, so that's great. And the pattern again, I have knit socks like this before. When I do a toe-up sock, for some reason, I like to use magic loop method. Normally I'm a DPN kind of gal, but when it comes to toe-up socks, I do use magic loop. And so, yeah, I feel like the pattern was well written. It was interesting because you're always working this little lacy pattern, which is quite easy to remember. And then once you get past the fleegle heel, there's a different pattern that starts on the back, but equally easy to remember with a 4-row repeat. So it was easily memorized and made for really pleasant knitting. And I find with a patterned sock, I guess, they just go faster because you're always trying to work through one more repeat of the pattern. And when it's only a 4-row repeat, it goes quickly. The other pair of socks that I finished just yesterday is the March Colorwork Cuff Club by Summer Lee. So these socks were a delight. So I was saying to a friend of mine, there are some 3-color rows on these socks. You can see at the very top where you've got this, where I used a bright green and then this peachy pink. Those 3-color rows can be tricky because you are inevitably having to juggle your yarns. I have a difficult time holding 2 yarns in one hand. So when I knit color work, I knit with 1 color in one hand and 1 color in the other. And then when I was using 3 colors at a time, I would switch off the color that I had in my left hand. It did mean I had to do some catches because the floats for some of these were quite long, but I think that I did an okay job with that. And even though there are quite a few strands on the top of this sock, it is quite stretchy. I use a 2.25 millimeter needle when I do my socks, generally speaking. And for the colorwork section, I use a 2.5 millimeter 9-inch needle. And for me, that has made a big difference for the evenness of my colorwork in a colorwork sock. Now, somebody asked me once why that is, and I think it's using a bigger needle means that the stitches are a little bit bigger, a little bit, so stranded colorwork, because of the strands in the back, tends to hug in, or at least have a little bit less horizontal elasticity than regular stockinette stitch. So using a bigger needle can help combat that, but also having it on a 9-inch circular means that the stitches are all sort of spread around that needle, and there's never any bunching or tighter floats where needles meet. So when I'm using DPNs, where my DPNs meet, in that little crook, in sort of the inside of that little triangle, you can get floats that are slightly smaller because they're not being stretched across a needle. But when I use a 9-inch circular, all of the floats and the stitches are being spread evenly around that circumference, and it really has helped me achieve an even stitch gauge around a colorwork sock. Boy, I'm happy with these colors. I treated myself to some yarn. I hadn't bought any yarn all year. And so in the middle of February, I treated myself to a few skeins of some colors of sock yarn that I could use in making these colorwork socks as they came up. So I'd gone to a store that is local to me. It's called Statement Junkie, and it's in Sherwood Park. And she carries Cascade Heritage sock, which is a 75% wool, 25% nylon sock base. And this bright purple was one of those socks skeins that I picked up, as was this light peach. So I picked up some new colors to add to my stash for colorwork socks, which I've been really enjoying. And I picked up some yarn for a springy sweater, which I'll show you in just a minute. So I have been working on some projects along the way, and the last time we spoke, I had just started a Mande sweater. This is a sweater by Petite Knits, and the original sweater is written for fingering weight, like a sock weight yarn, and to be held together with a mohair yarn. I don't really like mohair. For me, I find it prickly, and I know some people do. So an option might be a Surrey alpaca silk, but I really wanted to use some yarn for my stash. So I had some sport weight merino from La Bien-Aimée that I picked up in a sale years ago and was saving for something special. But I've decided that I don't want to save my yarn for something special. I want to use it. And then I can buy more special yarn. There's always more special yarn to be had, right? So I started the neckband last week, and I think I showed it to you. When I cast on this sweater in this really bright blue color, I was a little worried that the neckband was going to be too snug. It is a folded over neckband, and it is done using a 16-inch circular needle, which is fine, but you knit a bunch of ribbing, and then you fold it over and knit your cast on edge together with your active needles. And I was worried it was not going to be stretchy, but it is plenty stretchy. Look at that. Isn't that fabulous? So it will be sort of a fitted crew neck, but I'm not going to have any problems getting this up and over my head, which I'm a really big fan of this cast on and the neckline. I had knit a bunch, and I knit a bunch more, mostly because I'm a little worried about not having enough yarn. Now this is a superwash merino, and superwash wool does tend to grow when you block it. So I am a little bit confident that I will gain some length in this sweater when I block it, but let me show you what I've done. So I've knit the one sleeve. I may have done slightly less ribbing on this sleeve because my arms are not very long. and then I knit the other sleeve, and I use the same ball of yarn for each sleeve. So I started on one, and then I did the other, and then I had a little bit left over. So I have been doing helical knitting since just before the divide for the sleeves and body. So just about here, I've started helical knitting because I have found that with helical knitting, you're going to get funny pooling more in the straight stockinette sections. So for the top of this sweater, which is constantly, as a raglan, it's constantly increasing. Every other round, I'm increasing 8 stitches around the sweater. So that allows for sort of an even distribution of the color pooling. And then with the sleeves, I'm decreasing 2 stitches every about 7 rounds. And I found that that was okay with the color distribution as well. So you can see there's some striping, but there's not any major kind of strange pooling going on, I don't think. So at about the point, just before I divided for the sleeves and the body, I started doing helical knitting, and I do have a bit of a, thank you, sweater, just go ahead and give me a hug. There is a little bit of a lighter patch here, but overall I think that I'm doing okay. I have exactly this much yarn left. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the ribbing. Now I'm about an inch, maybe less than an inch, short of the length that the pattern recommends for starting the ribbing. But again, number one, I only have this much yarn left. So I'm going to start the ribbing and just rib until I am out of yarn. And because it is superwash merino, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to gain some length when I block it. But at this point, with this much yarn left, I'm going to start the ribbing and hope for the best. I am going to take some measurements of this sweater, mostly in the length, just to see how much length I actually gain, or if there's no change, I will let you know. I will report back next time, but I'm really getting to sort of the finish line of this sweater, and I'm hoping it's just an easy layering piece for spring, just to throw on over a t-shirt or whatever. I think it'll look great with a lot of things. And I'm also sort of, at that point where I'm like, I want to see how much ribbing I can get out of the yarn that I have left and see how close I cut it with this yarn and this sweater pattern. Now I was probably 100 or 200 yards short of the recommended yarn required for this sweater, but at the same time, a lot of designers add a certain percentage to their yarn requirements, knowing that different knitters knit differently, and then if you swatch or whatever, so all of those things can add yardage. Now I don't recommend this. This is not something that I do regularly, but I had this yarn and I really wanted to use it, and so I only had 3 skeins, and that was it. And so I'm doing my best to get the best sweater I can out of the yarn that I have. I will report back on whether or not my sweater grows in length and how much, and I'll show you next time. I do feel bad. I've been knitting feverishly on this sweater because I really wanted to know how far I could get with the yarn that I had, and I was hoping I could have it finished to show you this week. But that'll just be something that is going to have to wait for next time, because 3 inches or however much ribbing this yarn gets me is going to take me a while in 1x1 ribbing. But I have been working on a couple of other little projects. One of them is a project I started for a class that I'm teaching. I teach occasionally classes at the Fiber Nook in Edmonton, Alberta, and this spring I'm teaching a class on knitting in the round. So we're knitting a hat, and it's for knitters who maybe have done a bit of knitting but are wanting to sort of advance some skills. They've never knit a hat or never knit in the round, and so we're just talking about different techniques about how to do that. So as a part of this class, we're knitting the Barley hat by Petite Knits, which I'm a big fan of Tin Can Knits. All of their patterns are so well written and so thoughtful and so well sized. So this is a Barley hat, and I'm using just some leftover yarn that I had in my stash. Now, let me show you where this yarn comes from. Ta-da! This is my Spice Bloom pullover. I knit this sweater last year, and as you can see, it's got a big intarsia flower on it. And I loved the challenge of knitting this sweater. I don't often knit intarsia, and having knit this sweater, I don't know if I'll be knitting intarsia anytime soon, but I really love the result, and it was a fun challenge for me. Now, when I knit this sweater, as with a lot of different colorwork sweaters, you end up with leftovers. I probably had 3/4 of a ball left of the contrast colors used in this sweater. So there's a bright green, as you can see. There's this lighter pink and a darker pink. And I have lots of that left, and it's just sitting in my stash. And I've decided again that I'm not going to just hold on to this yarn. It needs to be used. So I'm knitting a Barley hat, partly for a demo for this class, and partly once I've finished with this hat as a demo, I'm going to be putting it in my pile for Craft for Yeg. So it will be a donation, but it's also, I'm using it as a teaching tool as well. So this is the hat that I'm making. I'm making the adult small, which is maybe just a little bit too small for me, but might be good for an older kid or teenager. And yeah, I've got this much left over. We have another class this Sunday. So I just started this hat in the class to talk about casting on and joining and not twisting your stitches and all those things that you need to know when you're knitting in the round. And now it's sort of at a point where I'm just waiting to do the top decreases of the hat, and we'll do that together in class on Sunday. So this, a very sort of soothing, comforting knit. It's been very lovely to work on, and I really don't have that much left to go. And then I will have used up most of this yarn. So I think what I might do with the other 2 colors from this sweater that I have leftover yarn from is knit up a couple more hats, and they will go in the donation bin. It is a worsted weight yarn, so it will be pretty cozy. It won't be a super warm hat, but when you live where I live, you kind of need different layers of hats. You need like the spring, but it's kind of cool hat. And then like you need a dead of winter hat when it's really cold out. So having different hats of differing weights is always a good thing where we live. And the last thing that I have on my needles is something I just cast on yesterday, again, as sort of a stash buster. I think last time we met, I told you that I was going to be going through my stash and just sort of getting rid of some of the yarns that I'm not using, and not by getting rid of, I mean setting them aside and then donating them to Craft for Yeg. Because Craft for Yeg, which is a local organization here in Edmonton, collects not only hand knitted items to be distributed to a number of different charitable organizations in our city, but they also accept craft supplies so that other crafters can make things to donate. So I've pulled a bunch of things from my stash that can be donated and used, so that's great. But I also have these part balls that I was hanging on to but not using. So this is another one of those. This is some, let me see, Ultra Wool Chunky. Ultra Wool Chunky is some, it's a Barocco yarn. It is a 100% superwash wool. And I had purchased this to make some slippers for my daughter for Christmas, which I did, but I got 2 skeins and I ended up using just a little under 1. So I had this whole skein left, and I started knitting a little basket. Now this is inside out right now. It's going to be flipped this way. So this is what the basket will look like. And then you can fold over the top like this for a cute little edge. This is a pattern from a book, which I don't often knit from the books in my library anymore, but I have them and I love them. This is called Susan B. Anderson's Kids Knitting Workshop, and I purchased this years ago when I was teaching both my kids to knit, but also I was teaching other kids to knit. And it was a useful tool to sort of think about projects and also knitting approaches to teach kids, to introduce them to the craft of knitting. And I even had this book signed by Susan B. Anderson herself when I met her in Knit City in 2016, according to this. So I pulled this book from the shelf and I'm making these cute little baskets. This is what they look like. I'm knitting the larger one. There is also a smaller one. So we'll see how much yarn I have left. So this little basket is mostly just for organization. It might go on my desk. It might go in my knitting cupboard, or it might go in my, I don't know. Anyway, you can always use a cute little basket. So I've got this much done. And this project, I don't think it will take me very long to finish. So it could be that I get another small basket out of this yarn. And if I don't, then that's okay too. And I've been really sort of in this mindset to use up the yarn that I have, especially having gone through and organized all my yarn. I don't know if it's spring and spring cleaning, but I'm really in a mindset to use up the yarn that I have in my stash before adding more yarn to it. And I think that I've been guilty of holding on to part balls but not using them. And so my plan for the next maybe month or two is to actually use up some of those small bits and pieces of yarn, particularly when I can make a hat like this. It's a lovely knit. I think it's a really soft and lovely hat. And I think that somebody out there is really going to enjoy it, hopefully. So I'll be knitting another couple of hats anyway from stash. And then I'll see how I'm doing. I'm not holding myself accountable to knit through all of my stash before I can buy new yarn, because I don't think that's a realistic expectation of myself. But I am happy to take advantage of this feeling that I have right now to use up some of this yarn and sort of harness it now while I'm feeling it to take advantage and to knit a few more things to donate. Now that the days are getting a little bit longer, we're getting more sunshine, the snow is melting slowly, but it is melting. The birds are singing. I'm starting to think about more warmer weather knits, and I think a lot of other knitters are too. So I'm making some plans to knit myself a couple of t-shirts for this spring. The first one is going to be either the Cumulus Tee by Petite Knit, which looks like this, or the Cumulus O-Neck Tee by Petite Knit, which looks like this. Now these t-shirts are very, very similar, and I guess I just need to decide what kind of neckline I would like the best. Part of me is sort of leaning towards the Cumulus Tee, which has got sort of a more open neck, and more like a V-neck. I'm not sure if it is exactly a V-neck, but it is a little bit more open, and that might be nice for springtime. But either way, whichever one I choose, I'll be knitting a slightly shorter sleeve than the pattern recommends, just because I think that on my body, I would like that better. Now I do have some yarn that I picked up on my little shopping spree that I allowed myself at Statement Junkie. Now Statement Junkie carries a lot of really fun yarns and a lot of sort of commercial yarns from Europe. So they carry some Sadness Garden yarns. They carry Knitting for Olive. And so Knitting for Olive was one that I was looking at, partly because I have been interested in using a cotton merino blended yarn. And Knitting for Olive does have one of those. So I picked up 5 of these little balls of Knitting for Olive in the cotton merino yarn. This is a fingering weight yarn. You can see it's quite a thin yarn. And it is 70% cotton and 30% merino. I've never knit with a combination of yarn like this before, so I was looking forward to just giving it a try to see how I like wearing the cotton merino blend. Cotton can be quite stiff to knit with, and it can also be it can also have sort of a not the nicest hand necessarily, depending on the kind of cotton that you're using. But when you blend it with wool, it gives it a little bit more bounce, a little bit maybe more drape. and it allows for the cooling elements of wool also to be added to the yarn. Now this yarn is very soft. It does not feel like, it feels like it's got some give to it. It'll be interesting to see what this yarn is like to knit with, and that was part of why I chose this yarn for this project. I wanted to give this cotton sort of merino group of yarns, I guess, a try. So I picked this coral color, which is quite bright, and I think will be really lovely in the spring and summer. And I picked up enough yarn to make either the Cumulus tee or the Cumulus O-neck tee. So this is one of my summer garments that I plan on knitting. Now, this is some very fine yarn. Fine in the sense that, I mean, it's pretty fine. It feels very nice, but also it's not very heavy weight yarn. So it could take me a while to knit up a t-shirt in this quite fine yarn. Let me see if I can find a gauge on this. So the ball band recommends a 3mm needle and about 28 stitches in 10 centimeters. So that's a pretty fine yarn. So I could be knitting this for quite some time, and that's okay. Like I said, it won't be really spring until April. So once I finish the Mande sweater, I think that this yarn is going to get cast on. Let me know in the comments below if you think I should knit the Cumulus tee or the O-neck, or if you vote for V-neck or O-neck. Let me know what you think. I'm excited to try out this new to me yarn, and I'll let you know what I think about it once I've had a chance to finish the garment, block it, and wear it a little bit in the warmer weather months. It's a bit of a experiment for me, but I am looking forward to trying new yarns, and this one in particular. Now, I have one other summer garment that is sort of on my radar, or maybe on my list to knit, and that's the Velor t-shirt by Andrea Mowry of Drury Rainey Knits. Part of my sort of inspiration to knit this t-shirt is the March to May knit along that she hosts every year. So I thought I would take part, but knitting a lighter weight garment that I could be wearing in the warmer months. Also, there is a knitter in my sort of knitting group, Christine, who knit one of these, I think last year, and I've seen her wear it a few times and it looks so good. So I'm excited to give this t-shirt a try. Now I've ordered some yarn for this t-shirt. The yarn that I've chosen is called Sadness Garn Tin Lena. So it's a linen yarn with cotton and viscose blend. It's quite a soft yarn, and I think it'll make a really lovely garment. I used this yarn held double last year to knit a bag by Petite Knit again, which I'll show in a picture of that here. And I really enjoyed using the yarn, but now I'm looking forward to knitting a garment out of it. So that yarn will be coming in the next day or two, and that'll be the next thing I knit once I've completed my Cumulus or Cumulus O-neck tee, depending on which one I choose. So I've heard really great things about the Velor pattern. I have a good friend of mine who's knit it and really enjoyed knitting it, and I think really enjoys her finished project. And Christine's is really nice. It looks very, very good on her. So I'm looking forward to giving this a try. It's a little bit of a play with color and a little bit of a sort of play with yarn. It's a yarn that I have used before, but not for a garment. So I guess my spring knits for this year are very much about trying new to me yarns to see how I like them in terms of knitting them, but also in terms of the finished garment. I have a final couple of knitting plans, I guess, for the next little while, and that involves, again, using up my stash. When I had organized all my stash, pulled out the things that I don't plan on using, I invited my husband to come in and have a look at my self-striping sock yarn to see if there's any that he was interested in so I could knit him a pair of socks. Now there's a couple pairs of, or skeins I guess, of yarn that he said he liked, and so I've set those aside for him. And in the meantime, my younger daughter waltzed in and claimed a skein of yarn for herself as well. So I'm going to be starting hers first. And they are some deep, deep stash. Now this yarn I have maybe had, I don't know how long I've had this yarn. I probably got it when my children were very, very young. And I don't even know if this dyer knits or dyes anymore. It is called Fish Knits Strong Heart 2-ply fingering weight yarn. And this is a 80% superwash merino wool, 20% nylon. And the colorway is called Canadiana. Now, if you have a look at the skein, it is mostly white with stripes of primary colors like blue, red, yellow, and green. And so when these socks knit up, the leg of the socks looks like a Hudson's Bay blanket. If you don't know what a Hudson's Bay blanket is, it looks like this, this, or this. If you have Canadian friends, they may have one in their life. Hudson Bay blankets were actually something that was used as a trading, they were used for trade with Indigenous peoples when Canada was very, very early in its infancy. In fact, the Hudson's Bay Company, which made these blankets, is older than Canada itself. And these blankets come in various sizes. They have little stripes on the side that tells you how many beaver pelts they're worth. So if an original Canadian Hudson's Bay blanket has 3 stripes on the side of it in black, that's how many beaver pelts it was worth in trade. And so Hudson's Bay, sort of these stripes on a cream background, are very, very synonymous with the Hudson's Bay Company and Canadiana in general. So these socks are what Lily wanted. And so I'm going to be starting these in the next week or two to be knit at the next volleyball tournament, which is coming up. It's always great to have some plain knitting at a volleyball tournament. Socks are kind of almost the ideal knitting because I can knit them without looking. They're small, will fit in my backpack, and I can get a lot of knitting done if I'm tense. The more stressed I am, the faster I knit. So this ball of yarn has got the stripes for the blanket at one end, and then at on the inside starting at the other end. So if I pull from the outside, I will get the stripes, and then there's a whole bunch of white, so I can knit the sock as big as I want. And then to knit the other sock, I simply pull from the center, and that's where the other set of stripes are, and then just work the sock through the white again to the middle of the skein of yarn. So it was very, very clever dyeing on their part. But again, this yarn has been in my stash for so long, it really just needs to be knit. Have you been doing a bit of spring cleaning yet? Are you getting that itch to use up the things that you have? And if so, what sorts of projects do you like to do to use up the little bits of yarn that you have? So far, hats have been a really great go-to, especially for those like half or more skeins of heavier weight yarns, like worsted or even heavier. Make for great hats, especially for donation, because you can make whatever size hat you like, and somebody out there will need a hat in that size. But I do have like single skeins of DK, sport weight. I also have a lot of lace weight yarn, which I did knit at one time, but I don't tend to knit anymore. And so I'm sort of at a loss as to what to do with that. So if anyone has any recommendations on what to do with lace weight yarn, I would love to hear about that. I hope in the next couple of weeks you find time to do the things you like to do, whether that's working on projects you already have or cleaning out your stash and working through some of the yarn that you already have. I hope whatever it is, it helps you find some peace of mind and some room to breathe. I know in the next couple of weeks, I plan on knitting a lot. I'll see you soon. Take care.